The United States, a beacon of democracy, finds itself grappling with an unsettling question. Is it teetering on the precipice of autocracy? The alarm bells are ringing, and the echoes of authoritarianism are growing louder. The unprecedented use of executive orders, the consolidation of power, and the erosion of democratic norms have cast a long shadow over the nation's future. The parallels between the current political climate and the rise of autocracy in other parts of the world are striking. As an outsider who watched the descent of Russia into authoritarianism under Vladimir Putin, I cannot help but feel a sense of dread and déjà vu. The tactics employed, the rhetoric used, and the gradual erosion of democratic institutions are eerily familiar. The United States has long prided itself on being a champion of democracy, a shining example for the world to emulate. Yet recent events have shaken this foundation, raising concerns about the fragility of democratic institutions. The rise of populism, the spread of misinformation, and the increasing polarization of society have created fertile ground for autocratic tendencies to take root. The world watches with bated breath as the United States grapples with these challenges. The outcome of this struggle will have profound implications not only for the American people, but for the future of democracy itself. The parallels between the rise of autocracy in Russia and the current political climate in the United States are too stark to ignore. When Putin assumed power, he initially introduced what many considered outrageous ideas. He targeted marginalized groups, portraying them as threats to traditional values. This tactic, sadly, found resonance in the United States as well. Putin systematically dismantled checks and balances, consolidating power within the executive branch. Independent media was muzzled, opposition voices were silenced, and the judiciary was brought under his control. This gradual erosion of democratic institutions is a hallmark of autocratic regimes. The erosion of democratic norms doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, insidious process, often masked by populist rhetoric and appeals to national security. The warning signs are there for those who are willing to see them. One of the most concerning trends is the normalization of the unthinkable. Ideas that were once considered fringe or extreme are now being openly discussed and even embraced by some segments of society. This normalization of the unacceptable is a dangerous sign, as it paves the way for more extreme measures to be taken. Executive orders, once a relatively obscure tool of governance, have taken center stage in recent years. While they can be a legitimate way for presidents to bypass congressional gridlock, their increasing use raises concerns about the balance of power. The executive order intended for specific circumstances is now being wielded as a weapon to circumvent Congress and impose the will of the executive branch. This shift undermines the legislative process and disrupts the delicate balance of power that is fundamental to a functioning democracy. The danger lies not just in the frequency of executive orders, but also in their content. When used to enact sweeping policy changes without legislative oversight, they threaten the very fabric of democratic governance. This is particularly worrisome when such orders target vulnerable groups or curtail civil liberties. The increasing reliance on executive orders is a symptom of a deeper malaise within the American political system. The inability of Congress to find common ground and address pressing issues has created a vacuum that the executive branch has been all too willing to fill. This power imbalance poses a serious threat to the long-term health of American democracy. Section 4. Normalizing the unthinkable. One of the most insidious tactics employed by autocratic regimes is the normalization of the unthinkable. Ideas that were once considered taboo or beyond the pale are gradually introduced into public discourse, their edges softened by carefully crafted rhetoric. What starts as a whisper campaign, a fringe theory circulating in the darkest corners of the internet, slowly seeps into the mainstream. The more these ideas are repeated, the less shocking they become, until they are no longer unthinkable but merely controversial. This process of normalization is often accompanied by a demonization of those who dare to speak out against it. Critics are labeled as unpatriotic, as enemies of the people, their voices silenced by a chorus of hatred and intimidation. This is how autocracy takes root, not through a sudden coup d'etat, but through a slow, creeping erosion of democratic norms and values. It's a process that often goes unnoticed until it's too late, until the unthinkable has become the new normal. Section 5. The erosion of trust. A functioning democracy relies on a foundation of trust. Trust in institutions, trust in the electoral process, and trust in the rule of law. When that trust erodes, the entire system is jeopardized. The rise of misinformation and disinformation, fueled by social media and partisan actors, has poisoned the well of public discourse. It has become increasingly difficult to distinguish fact from fiction, truth from falsehood. This erosion of trust extends to the very institutions that are meant to safeguard democracy. The judiciary, the media, and even the electoral process itself have come under attack, their legitimacy called into question. This is a dangerous game, for once trust is lost, it is incredibly difficult to regain. Without it, democracy becomes a hollow shell, vulnerable to the whims of demagogues and the siren song of authoritarianism. Section 6. A warning from history. History is replete with examples of democracies that succumb to the allure of authoritarianism. From ancient Athens to Weimar Germany, the pattern is eerily familiar. A confluence of factors, economic instability, social unrest, and a loss of faith in democratic institutions, creates an environment ripe for exploitation by those who promise easy answers and a return to greatness. The rise of Nazi Germany serves as a chilling reminder of the fragility of democracy and the devastating consequences of complacency. What began with the scapegoating of minorities and the suppression of dissent quickly spiraled into a totalitarian regime that plunged the world into war. The lessons of history are clear. We must never take our democratic freedoms for granted, and we must be eternally vigilant against those who seek to undermine them. Section 7. Safeguarding democracy. The future of American democracy hangs in the balance. The choices made today will determine whether the nation continues on its path as a beacon of freedom or succumbs to the siren song of autocracy. Safeguarding democracy requires a collective effort, a commitment from all citizens to uphold the values upon which the nation was founded. Education is paramount. We must equip future generations with the critical thinking skills necessary to discern truth from falsehood and to recognize the dangers of authoritarianism. A well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. Civic engagement is equally crucial. Democracy thrives on the active participation of its citizens. We must hold our elected officials accountable, demand transparency, and challenge abuses of power. Apathy is the enemy of democracy. The defense of democracy is a continuous process, not a destination. It requires constant vigilance, a willingness to speak truth to power, and an unwavering belief in the power of the people to shape their own destiny. The time to act is now, before it is too late.